probably seen this phenomenon before, of thousands of birds flying in sync, and wondered, why would they do that?
Мужчина проезжал на своей машине вдоль поля, и его внимание привлекло.
The creature had strange features scientists couldn't immediately classify. Now researchers are...
Since ancient times, the Jordan River has been known as one of the most sacred rivers on earth. Flowing through lands filled with history and faith, its waters have witnessed moments that shaped the spiritual beliefs of millions. According to the Bible, this is the river where Jesus was baptized, turning it into a symbol of renewal and divine presence. But in recent days, something unusual has begun to unfold along its banks. Local residents have reported animals behaving in strange ways. Birds circle restlessly above the water, fish gather unusually close to the shore, and wildlife appears unsettled for reasons no one can clearly explain. This is found in the Jordan River. Is Jesus Christ coming soon? Before we continue, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and stay with us as we explore what is really happening along the Jordan River. Long before the water began to rise, something else started to change. It did not begin with the river. It began with the animals. At first, the signs were subtle, small details that most people would normally ignore. But in the quiet villages along the riverbanks, people who had lived there for generations started noticing that something was wrong. The birds were the first. Flocks that normally flew calmly across the sky began circling endlessly above the water. Instead of migrating or settling in nearby trees, they moved in wide, restless spirals, as if searching for somewhere to land, but unable to find it. Some villagers said the birds stayed like that for hours, spinning above the river in tight formations. Others noticed that the sounds were different. Usually, mornings near the river were filled with ordinary birdsong, but during those days, the air was filled with sharp, anxious cries. Large flocks would suddenly take off at once, filling the sky in chaotic patterns before disappearing toward distant hills. Then people began noticing the fish. Fishermen who had worked the river for decades said they had never seen anything like it. Huge numbers of fish began gathering close to the shoreline. Instead of swimming in deeper water, entire schools crowded near the banks, their bodies moving tightly together just beneath the surface. In some places, the water seemed almost alive with movement. Children walking near the shore pointed out how the fish appeared restless, darting back and forth as if trying to escape something beneath the water. Even stranger, certain animals began leaving the area entirely. Goats and livestock that usually grazed near the river started pulling away from the banks. Dogs barked nervously at the water and refused to approach it. A few farmers claimed their animals became unusually agitated at night, pacing in their pens or staring toward the river in silence. At first, these moments seemed unrelated. But then, the videos began appearing online. Someone uploaded a clip of birds circling endlessly above the river. Another video showed thousands of fish packed tightly near the shoreline. Soon, more recordings followed, different locations, different witnesses, but the same unsettling behavior. Within hours, the footage began spreading across social media. People watching from around the world started leaving comments below the videos. Some said it looked like the animals were confused. Others believed the creatures were reacting to something humans could not yet detect. And many viewers said the same thing. They had never seen anything like it before. Local residents, however, were not entirely surprised. Those who had grown up near rivers and forests often spoke about something scientists still struggle to fully explain, that animals sometimes sense danger long before people do. In history, there are many accounts of animals reacting before earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and powerful storms. birds abandoning nests, fish changing their patterns, livestock becoming restless. Researchers have long debated whether animals can detect subtle changes in the environment, vibrations in the ground, shifts in air pressure, or tiny chemical changes in the water. But whatever the explanation, one thing is clear. Animals often react first. But in this case, what made the situation unsettling was not just that animals were behaving strangely. It was how many of them were doing it at the same time. Birds in the sky, fish near the banks, livestock refusing to go near the river. Each sign alone might have seemed ordinary, but together they began to form a pattern that people could no longer ignore. Some residents began quietly discussing the events with their neighbors. Others simply watched and waited. Yet for many who lived along the river, the strange behavior stirred something deeper than curiosity. It stirred an old memory. For thousands of years, people living in this region have looked to nature as a kind of warning system. When the world begins to change, but the animals often respond before anyone else understands why. Even ancient religious texts describe moments when the natural world seemed to react to events far beyond human control. At the very beginning of the book of Revelation, the world is described entering a time when creation itself begins to tremble, when the earth, the sea, and the living creatures within them respond to forces that signal the unfolding of events greater than humanity can fully comprehend. Whether one sees these passages as prophecy or symbolism, they reflect an idea that has existed for centuries. That sometimes, before something major happens, the natural world begins to move in unusual ways. And along the river, that possibility was beginning to weigh heavily on people's minds. Because while the animals continued to circle, gather, and flee, the river itself remained strangely quiet. The surface of the water still looked calm. No storms had appeared. No warnings had been issued. Yet something about the atmosphere felt different. Many residents later said the air seemed unusually heavy during those days, as if the entire landscape was holding its breath. Then, without warning, everything changed. Dark clouds gathered in the distance. Winds began sweeping across the valley. And within a matter of hours, the calm river that had seemed so ordinary only days earlier transformed into something far more dangerous. The water began rising, at first slowly, then faster. Rain poured across the region while the river swelled beyond its banks, pushing outward across fields and roads. The animals that had fled earlier were already gone, but the people now found themselves facing the full force of what was coming. Streets began to flood. Fields disappeared beneath rushing currents. Entire sections of land were swallowed by the rising water. And as the river surged through the landscape, many people remembered the strange behavior they had witnessed only days before. The circling birds, the restless fish, the animals fleeing the shoreline, signs that, in hindsight, seemed impossible to ignore. But even as the floodwaters spread across the land, another discovery was about to capture everyone's attention. Because as the swollen river pushed deeper into the valley, something unexpected began appearing in the water. Something no one had anticipated. Something far stranger than the flood itself. But what appeared in the water next was far stranger. To Part 3. Fish with unusual colors. After the flood. Approximately 700 words. When the floodwaters finally began to settle, the Jordan River looked different. For days, the violent rain had turned the river into a rushing force of mud and debris. Fields had been swallowed by water. Roads had disappeared beneath the current, and entire sections of the riverbank had been reshaped by the flood. When the storm passed, the landscape was quiet again, but the river was no longer the same. thick brown water still moved slowly toward the Dead Sea, carrying the remains of branches, plants, and soil torn loose during the flooding. Fishermen returned cautiously to the riverbanks, hoping to see how badly the ecosystem had been affected. At first, everything seemed normal. Then one of the fishermen noticed something strange drifting near the surface. It was a fish, but its color looked wrong. Instead of the dull silver or gray that most fish in the Jordan River usually display, this one had scales tinted with a deep red color. In the sunlight, the fish almost looked as if its body had been stained. The fisherman called the others over. Soon several people were standing at the edge of the river, watching as more fish appeared in the shallow water. Some were red. Others carried a strange bluish tone across their scales. A few looked almost green. Within minutes, the fishermen began pulling nets through the water. What they caught only deepened the mystery. Mixed among the normal fish were several whose colors looked completely different from anything usually seen in the Jordan. Some fish appeared dark crimson. Others reflected a pale metallic blue when the light touched their scales. Older fishermen stared silently at the catch. Many of them had worked on this river their entire lives. They knew the species that lived in these waters. They knew the way fish behaved after storms. But they had never seen fish with colors like these appearing all at once. Soon phones came out. Videos were recorded as fishermen held the strange fish toward the camera. In the background, the muddy current of the Jordan River could still be seen, moving slowly past the banks. Within hours, the footage began spreading online. Clips of red fish and blue-tinted fish caught in the Jordan River quickly reached thousands of viewers around the world. Comment sections filled with questions. Some people believed the strange colors could be explained scientifically. Floods often disturb the natural balance of rivers. But when powerful currents churn up the riverbed, they release minerals, sediments, and microorganisms that had been buried beneath the mud for years. Certain types of algae can also bloom suddenly after heavy flooding, tinting water red, green, or brown, and sometimes affecting the color of fish. Others suggested that sudden changes in temperature or oxygen levels might have stressed the fish, altering the way their scales reflected light. These explanations seemed reasonable, but there was still something unsettling about the timing. Because the unusual fish appeared immediately after one of the most violent floods the region had experienced in years. And they appeared in a river that carries enormous biblical significance. For thousands of years, the Jordan River has been one of the most symbolic places in the Bible. And it was here that the Israelites crossed into the Promised Land. It was here that the prophet Elijah parted the waters. And centuries later, it was here that Jesus himself was baptized. Because of this history, many people have always believed that events occurring in the Jordan River could carry deeper meaning. And when videos of strangely colored fish began circulating online, some viewers immediately turned to the Bible. In the book of Exodus, the Nile River was once turned red during one of the plagues described in Scripture. In that account, the waters changed dramatically, and the life within the river was affected. Other passages in the Bible describe moments when the seas and rivers themselves become part of the signs that accompany major events in human history. One verse from the book of Revelation is often quoted in discussions about unusual events involving the waters of the earth. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. Revelation 8:9. For believers, passages like this describe a time when the natural world begins responding to forces that signal the unfolding of events far greater than humanity can fully understand. Of course, not everyone interprets these verses literally. Many scholars say the language in Revelation is symbolic, describing spiritual realities rather than specific natural disasters. Still, when strange things begin appearing in a river tied so closely to biblical history, people inevitably begin asking questions. Are these events simply the result of environmental changes after a powerful flood? Or could they be something more? Along the Jordan River, fishermen continued examining their catches as the muddy water slowly cleared. The red fish, the blue fish, the unusual patterns glimmering beneath the surface. For now, scientists could not offer a definite explanation. But as people continued watching the river and discussing the strange discoveries online, something else began appearing in the water. Something darker, something heavier, objects slowly drifting up from beneath the riverbed. Objects that looked as if they had been buried beneath the Jordan's waters for centuries. And when the first one reached the shoreline, people immediately realized this discovery might be far more significant than the strange fish themselves. Because whatever was emerging from the depths of the Jordan River now did not look natural at all. And yet the strangest discovery was still waiting beneath the surface. But the mystery of the Jordan River was far from over. Because what witnesses would see next would leave the entire world stunned. Stay with us, because the next discovery is even more shocking. In the days following the flood, the Jordan River continued revealing things no one expected. At first, it was the strangely colored fish. But soon, fishermen would discover something far more unsettling. It happened early in the morning, while a small group of fishermen were casting their nets along a quiet section of the river. The water had finally begun clearing after the violent flood, though the current still carried mud and debris from the storm. As the men pulled their nets upward, they immediately felt something unusual. The net was far heavier than normal. At first they assumed it had become tangled with branches or rocks that had been swept into the river during the flooding. But as they struggled to pull it toward the boat, something inside the net suddenly moved. One of the fishermen froze. Whatever was trapped inside the net was alive. The men pulled harder, slowly lifting the dripping mesh from the water. Muddy river water poured back into the current as the shape inside the net began to reveal itself. And then they saw it. Wrapped within the net was a massive creature unlike anything they had expected to find in the Jordan River. Long, thick limbs twisted against the ropes of the net. Its body was soft and glistening, with skin that reflected dark shades of gray and purple beneath the morning light. For a moment, no one spoke. The creature looked disturbingly similar to a giant octopus. But that made no sense. Octopuses are creatures of the sea, normally living in deep saltwater environments. The Jordan River is a freshwater river, narrow and relatively shallow in many places. A creature like this should not be here. Yet there it was. The fishermen dragged the net onto the riverbank, where the massive creature lay slowly moving its limbs across the wet stones. Its size alone stunned everyone present. It was far larger than anything normally found in the region. Within minutes, word began spreading through the nearby village. People rushed down toward the riverbank to see the strange creature for themselves. Phones appeared almost instantly as witnesses began filming the enormous animal lying beside the water. In the videos, the creature's long arms stretched across the ground as it slowly moved, its suction cups gripping the muddy surface. Some viewers later estimated the creature could have been several meters long from end to end. Children stood back nervously, while adults tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Many had lived near the Jordan River their entire lives and had never encountered anything remotely like it. The videos spread quickly. Within hours, footage of the massive octopus-like creature pulled from the Jordan River began appearing across social media platforms around the world. Comment sections exploded with speculation. Some viewers believed the flood had somehow carried the creature upstream from the Dead Sea or another connected waterway. Others suggested it might have escaped from a research facility or private aquarium. But a third group offered a more mysterious explanation. They believed the creature may have come from deep beneath the water itself, perhaps from hidden underground caverns or ancient waterways connected to the river system. For centuries, many cultures have told stories of strange creatures emerging from deep waters during times of upheaval. And in biblical writings, the sea often symbolizes forces of chaos and mystery. One ancient passage describes a powerful creature rising from the waters, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea." Revelation 13:1. Throughout history, some have interpreted passages like this symbolically, representing political powers or spiritual forces. Others believe they reflect humanity's ancient fear of what might exist beyond the visible surface of the waters. Standing along the banks of the Jordan River that morning, many people could not help but think about those ancient words. A massive creature appearing suddenly after a violent flood in one of the most historically significant rivers on Earth. Whether coincidence or something stranger, the sight left many witnesses deeply unsettled. Eventually, wildlife officials arrived and carefully examined the creature. Some experts suggested it could be an unusually large cephalopod that had somehow been displaced during the flood, though even they admitted such a scenario would be extremely rare. Still, the scientific explanations did little to calm the sense of mystery surrounding the event. Because, as strange as the creature was, it would not remain the most shocking thing people witnessed that week. And as the crowds slowly dispersed from the riverbank and the videos continued spreading across the internet, something else began happening above the valley. At first, only a few people noticed it. A sudden shift in the sky. The clouds began moving in strange patterns above the river. The air grew strangely quiet. And then a faint glow appeared high above the horizon. What happened next would shock everyone watching, because the next sign did not come from the river at all. It did not come from beneath the water. It came from above, from far above. It came from the sky. Not long after the strange creature was discovered near the Jordan River, something else began drawing people's attention. This time, it wasn't coming from the water. It was coming from the sky. The first report came just after sunset. A few residents living near the river noticed an unusual glow appearing above the valley. At first, they assumed it was simply the reflection of distant lights, or perhaps a helicopter moving through the night sky. But the light did not move. It remained fixed in the same position, shining down toward the riverbank. Within minutes, more people began noticing it. Standing along the shoreline, several witnesses pointed toward the sky, where a bright column of light seemed to stretch downward from the clouds. The beam was narrow and sharply defined, almost like a spotlight shining from far above. Yet no aircraft could be heard. There was no sound of helicopter blades, no distant hum of engines, nothing that would normally accompany a light that powerful. The glow simply hovered there, still and silent. Now, people quickly began pulling out their phones. Videos recorded from different angles showed the same strange phenomenon. A bright vertical beam appeared suspended above the river valley, illuminating the ground below with an eerie pale light. The beam did not flicker. It did not move across the sky like a passing aircraft. Instead, it remained almost perfectly still. Some witnesses said the light lasted several minutes before slowly fading into the clouds. Others claimed it appeared more than once over the following nights. As the videos spread online, thousands of viewers began examining the footage, frame by frame, trying to determine what could have caused the mysterious light. Some believed the explanation was simple. Certain atmospheric conditions can sometimes create unusual visual effects in the sky. And when ice crystals form in the upper atmosphere, they can reflect light in ways that create vertical beams known as light pillars. Others suggested the beam could have been caused by reflections from powerful ground lights interacting with low clouds. Another theory pointed to aircraft technology. Drones and surveillance equipment can sometimes produce focused beams of light, especially when operating at high altitude. But there were problems with these explanations. Many witnesses insisted that the light did not behave like a drone or aircraft beam. Normally, such lights move across the sky or change direction. This one remained perfectly still. Even stranger, there was no visible source. In the videos, the beams seemed to appear directly from the clouds themselves. No aircraft, no visible structure, just a bright column of light, descending silently from above. As the footage circulated, reactions quickly became divided. Some viewers dismissed the phenomenon as a simple atmospheric effect. Others were not so sure. Because the light appeared only days after the flood, after the strangely colored fish, and after the discovery of the giant creature pulled from the river. To many people watching these events unfold, the timing felt too unusual to ignore. And because all of it was happening near the Jordan River, some observers began connecting the events to ancient religious imagery. For thousands of years, light descending from the sky has often been associated with divine encounters in biblical writings. In the book of Exodus, a pillar of light guided the Israelites through the wilderness. In other passages, radiant light is described appearing during moments when heaven and earth seem to briefly intersect. Of course, many scholars emphasize that such passages are symbolic and deeply theological rather than literal descriptions of physical events. Still, the imagery remained powerful. And for the people standing along the riverbanks that night, watching a silent beam of light stretch down from the clouds, it was difficult not to think about those ancient stories. But the most intriguing reports did not come from the videos themselves. They came from the witnesses. Several people who had watched the light closely claimed they saw something unusual inside the beam. At first, their accounts sounded uncertain. Some described faint shapes moving slowly within the glow. Others said the center of the light seemed brighter than the edges, almost as if something was passing through it. One witness even claimed the beam briefly intensified, revealing what looked like a silhouette forming inside the light before it faded again. Skeptics quickly dismissed these claims. Under unusual lighting conditions, the human eye can easily misinterpret shadows and reflections. What people believed they saw inside the light may simply have been visual distortion or imagination. But not everyone was convinced, because when multiple witnesses began describing similar shapes appearing inside the beam, the mystery only deepened. And as people continued debating the strange footage online, the story surrounding the Jordan River was about to take another unexpected turn. Because the next discovery would not only raise more questions, it would begin connecting the strange events in ways no one had anticipated. And this is where the story becomes truly mysterious. By the time the strange light appeared above the Jordan River, thousands of people were already watching closely. The flood had shaken the region. The strange fish had raised questions, and the discovery of the giant creature had only deepened the mystery. Now something new had appeared in the sky. For several minutes, the bright column of light remained suspended above the river valley, casting a pale glow across the dark water below. Witnesses stood along the banks, many of them filming the strange phenomenon with their phones. At first, nothing else seemed to happen. Then someone pointed toward the center of the light. There was movement. Inside the beam, a faint shape appeared. And at first it was difficult to see clearly. The light was bright, and the distance made the details uncertain. But several witnesses insisted that something was standing within the glow. A shape. A figure. Slowly, the outline became clearer. According to multiple witnesses, the shape resembled the form of a person. Even more astonishing, some said the figure appeared to be standing directly above the surface of the water. Phones continued recording as people along the riverbank tried to focus their cameras on the glowing beam. In several videos that later circulated online, a faint silhouette could indeed be seen inside the light. The figure appeared tall and motionless, surrounded by a soft radiance that made the shape difficult to distinguish clearly. But to many who were there, the resemblance felt unmistakable, and the figure seemed to resemble a man. And some witnesses believed it looked strikingly similar to traditional images of Jesus. Word spread quickly through the crowd. Within minutes, some people began kneeling along the riverbank. Others raised their hands in prayer. The Jordan River has long been one of the most sacred locations in Christianity. According to the Gospels, it was here that Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. It is also the river that many believers associate with miracles, crossings, and moments when heaven seemed to briefly touch the earth. Because of this, the appearance of a glowing figure above the Jordan carried deep emotional meaning for many who were present. Several witnesses later said the atmosphere felt overwhelming. The air was completely silent. The light remained steady, and the glowing shape within it appeared calm and unmoving. One person recording the scene whispered in disbelief, while others could be heard quietly praying in the background. Within hours, the videos began spreading across the internet. Clips of the glowing figure were viewed millions of times as people around the world tried to determine what they were seeing. Some viewers believed the footage showed something extraordinary. They pointed to biblical passages describing moments when radiant figures appeared surrounded by light. One verse often mentioned comes from the book of Revelation. His face was like the sun, shining in all its brilliance. Revelation 1:16. For believers, descriptions like this echo the imagery of a radiant figure appearing in divine glory. And because the sighting occurred above the Jordan River, at a place deeply connected to the life of Jesus, many viewers interpreted the event as a possible spiritual sign. Some even suggested the figure could represent a reminder of the prophecies describing Christ's eventual return. But not everyone agreed. Skeptics quickly offered alternative explanations. Some argued that the figure was simply an illusion, created by light interacting with clouds, mist, or moisture rising from the river. Under certain atmospheric conditions, reflections can form shapes that resemble human silhouettes. Others suggested the effect could have been caused by camera distortion. Bright lights filmed at long distances sometimes create optical artifacts that appear like figures or shapes within the image. A few viewers believed the entire phenomenon might have been the result of projection technology or an unusual drone display. Experts reviewing the footage remained cautious. The videos, while intriguing, were not clear enough to confirm exactly what had appeared inside the beam of light. And yet, despite the uncertainty, one fact remained undeniable. Something unusual had appeared above the Jordan River that night. A silent column of light, a shape within it, and a moment that left thousands of witnesses struggling to explain what they had seen. Eventually, the glow slowly began to fade. The beam weakened, dissolving into the clouds above the valley. Within minutes, the sky returned to darkness. But the mystery had already taken hold. Because when the videos continued spreading across the world, millions of people began asking the same question. What exactly had appeared above the Jordan River that night? And more importantly, what could it mean? In just a short period of time, the Jordan River became the center of a series of strange and unexpected events. First came the unusual behavior of animals. Birds circling endlessly above the water. Fish gathering nervously near the surface. Livestock refusing to approach the riverbanks. Then came the flood. A powerful surge of water that reshaped the landscape and exposed things hidden beneath the river for years. After the flood, fishermen began discovering fish with unusual colors. Deep red, bright blue, and patterns rarely seen in the Jordan River before. Soon after that, an enormous creature resembling a giant octopus was pulled from the water, leaving both locals and experts searching for explanations. Then came the strange light, a silent beam descending from the sky and hovering above the river valley for several minutes. And finally, the moment that captured the world's attention. A glowing figure appearing within that light, standing above the waters of one of the most historically significant rivers in the Bible. Some people believe these events are simply rare natural occurrences. Floods can disturb ecosystems. Atmospheric conditions can create unusual lights. Camera angles and reflections can sometimes produce images that appear far more mysterious than they really are. But others see the events differently. For them, the Jordan River is not just another location. It is a place deeply connected to biblical history, prophecy, and faith. And when unusual events appear in such a place, many people cannot help but wonder if they might carry a deeper meaning. So now the question remains, are these simply rare natural events? Or could they be signs that something greater may be unfolding? What do you think is really happening at the Jordan River? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to explore more mysterious discoveries and biblical signs from around the world, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more.
Say the country's water reserves have dropped to their lowest level in 80 years.
Where the sea and river meet but don't blend together right away, creating an unreal split of color.
For centuries, the Jordan River has been closely connected with sacred stories in the Bible. This is the place where Jesus Christ was baptized, and it is also a river associated with many ancient miracles. But recently, strange phenomena have begun to draw attention. Some witnesses claim they saw the river suddenly appear in two different colors. Others captured footage of a tornado forming right above the water. And at times, the river itself seemed to surge and bubble, almost as if it were erupting from beneath the surface. Are these events simply rare acts of nature, or could they be signs of something more? Before we go deeper into this story, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. For centuries, the Jordan River has been seen as more than just a river. It is a place deeply connected to faith, prophecy, and moments that many believe reveal the power of God. After leaving Egypt and wandering through the wilderness for many years, the people of Israel finally arrived at the edge of the Jordan River. On the other side lay the land they had long been promised, the Promised Land. But there was a problem. The river was wide, deep, and flowing fast. There was no bridge, no boats, and thousands of people needed to cross. According to the Bible, something astonishing happened the moment the priests stepped into the water carrying the Ark of the Covenant. Suddenly, the flowing river stopped. The water upstream began to pile up like a rising wall, while the riverbed below turned completely dry. The Scripture describes the moment clearly. The waters coming down from upstream stood still and rose in a heap, and the people crossed over opposite Jericho. Book of Joshua 3:16. With the river split apart, thousands of men, women, and children walked straight through the middle of the Jordan River. There were no bridges and no boats, only a path where rushing water had been moments earlier. For many believers, this event was not simply unusual. It was seen as a powerful miracle confirming that God was guiding His people. But the Jordan River did not witness only one miracle, and what happened there later would become just as mysterious. Along the ancient banks of the Jordan River, the water usually moves slowly and quietly, reflecting the sky above and the desert hills surrounding it. Pilgrims come to this river seeking peace. Unbelievers remember it as a sacred place where miracles once unfolded. But there are moments when that calm disappears in an instant, moments when the river behaves in a way that leaves witnesses shaken. Without warning, the surface of the water begins to tremble. At first it is subtle, almost unnoticeable, like a faint shiver passing through the current. Then small bubbles begin rising from the depths of the riverbed. One, then several, then dozens. Within seconds, the bubbling spreads across the water. The calm current suddenly turns violent. The surface churns as if something powerful is pushing upward from beneath the earth. Thick foam forms across the river, and the sound of rushing water grows louder and louder. Then the unthinkable happens. The river begins to erupt. Water surges upward in violent bursts, sending waves rolling toward the banks. Dense clouds of steam rise into the air, turning the river into a boiling mass of movement and noise. What had been a peaceful stream, moments earlier now, looks like a cauldron of boiling water. Witnesses describe the air filling with a strange smell as vapor rises from the surface. Fish begin floating lifelessly to the top, their silver bodies drifting in the chaotic current. Birds that once circled above the river suddenly scatter into the sky. Animals that drink along the banks flee the area as if sensing danger long before humans understand what is happening. People standing nearby often freeze in disbelief. Some step backward in fear. Others raise their phones with shaking hands, trying to capture the terrifying moment unfolding before them. And the river roars and churns as bubbles burst across its surface, sending waves crashing against the muddy shore. One resident who witnessed such an event described the moment with visible fear. The water suddenly started boiling like a pot over fire. It kept bubbling and rising. We had never seen the river act like that before. It felt like something under the earth was pushing the river upward. Scenes like this cause many believers to remember the words written long ago in the Bible, where the forces of nature are often described as responding to the power of God. One verse captures this overwhelming authority. "The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty waters." Book of Psalms 29:3. For those who stand along the river during these rare moments, the experience is deeply unsettling. The Jordan River has flowed through history as a symbol of faith and divine encounters. Yet when the water suddenly erupts and begins to boil with unstoppable force, many cannot help but feel that the river itself is reacting to something unseen beneath the earth. The rising steam, the violent bubbles, the lifeless fish drifting along the current, all of it creates the eerie feeling that nature itself is sending a warning. No one watching truly understands why the river suddenly explodes with such power. They only see the water rising, the chaos spreading across the surface, and the strange silence that follows when the eruption slowly fades away. But as frightening as these moments appear, they are only one example of how nature can suddenly turn violent. Because sometimes the earth does not just disturb the water. Sometimes the ground itself begins to move. After rare eruptions where the water suddenly boils and bubbles from below, another frightening sight has sometimes appeared above the surface of the river. Violent spinning columns of wind forming near the water. At first it begins as a strange movement in the air. The sky grows darker. The wind begins to circle slowly. The surface of the river starts twisting in tight spirals. Small whirlpools appear in the current as the wind above and the water below seem to move together. Within moments, the air tightens into a rotating column that stretches downward toward the river. What begins as a disturbance quickly transforms into one of the most terrifying forces in nature, a tornado. On the spinning column of air roars like a freight train, pulling dust, water, and debris into its violent rotation. Witnesses say the river itself seems to be drawn upward into the storm, as if the wind is trying to rip the water from the earth. The column twists faster and faster, forming a dark funnel that reaches from the sky toward the ground. Tornadoes are known to be among the most powerful natural forces on the planet. Some can spin with winds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. At that speed, almost nothing can stand in their path. Trees are ripped from the soil as if they were small branches. Roofs are torn away from buildings in seconds. Entire houses can be lifted from their foundations and thrown across the land. Cars are tossed through the air like toys, spinning helplessly in the violent wind. When such a storm forms near water, the sight becomes even more terrifying. The surface of the river begins swirling violently beneath the funnel. Waves crash against the banks, and water sprays high into the air as the rotating wind pulls everything into its spinning core. People who have seen such moments often describe the experience with fear and disbelief. One witness recalled the terrifying sight near the river. The wind started spinning over the water. Then the funnel appeared, and the river looked like it was being twisted upward. It felt like the storm wanted to swallow everything around it. In moments like this, the river, the sky, and the land all seem to move together in chaotic power. The peaceful landscape suddenly transforms into a scene of unstoppable destruction. Throughout history, the Bible has described powerful winds as part of the overwhelming force of creation. Storms and whirlwinds are often portrayed as reminders that nature itself moves under forces far greater than human control. One verse captures the terrifying strength of these storms. The Lord has his way in the whirlwind and in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. Book of Nahum 1:3. For those who witness tornadoes forming near rivers, the experience can feel like standing at the edge of something immense and uncontrollable. The spinning wind tears across the land, pulling water, dust, and debris into a violent spiral that seems determined to erase everything in its path. Houses collapse, trees snap, vehicles tumble through the air as the storm moves forward with terrifying speed. And when the tornado finally weakens and fades, when the silence that follows can feel almost as frightening as the storm itself. Broken trees lie scattered across the land. Debris covers the ground. The once calm river flows quietly again as if nothing had happened. Yet the memory of the spinning funnel in the sky remains burned into the minds of those who saw it. Because moments like these leave people asking the same haunting question. Are such storms simply powerful forces of weather? Or could they be signs of deeper disturbances moving through the natural world? After the terrifying tornado passes, the land often falls into an uneasy silence. The violent winds fade. The spinning funnel disappears into the distance. For a moment, everything feels strangely calm again along the banks of the Jordan River. But that calm rarely lasts. A people who live near rivers know that when the sky begins to change, something worse may still be coming. Slowly, the light begins to fade from the horizon. Dark clouds gather above the land, thick and heavy, swallowing the sunlight that once reflected off the river. The air grows humid and still. Even the sound of birds begins to disappear as the sky turns darker with every passing minute. Then the first drops of rain begin to fall. At first, they seem harmless. Small ripples spread across the surface of the river. People look up at the sky, hoping it will pass quickly. But the rain does not stop. Within minutes, the drizzle becomes a downpour. Sheets of rain pour from the clouds as thunder echoes across the sky. The river, already restless from the storm before it, begins to rise. Water rushes down from distant hills and valleys, pouring into the river with unstoppable force. The current grows stronger, the level climbs higher. Soon the water begins to push against the banks. At first it spills gently over the edges of the river, but as the rain continues without mercy, the situation becomes far more dangerous. The Jordan River begins to overflow. Water spreads across fields and roads. Streets that once carried cars now become channels of rushing brown water. The current pulls debris, branches, and mud through towns and villages that lie too close to the river. Within hours, the flood transforms the landscape. Cars are lifted and carried away by the current. Homes slowly disappear beneath rising water. Families rush to higher ground, carrying what little they can save as emergency crews struggle to reach those trapped by the sudden flood. People shout warnings. Sirens echo through the streets. Helicopters circle above the growing disaster as entire neighborhoods begin to disappear under the rising water. Scenes like this remind many people that floods are among the oldest and most destructive disasters known to humanity. Across history, entire civilizations have told stories of great floods that reshaped the world. The Bible contains one of the most well-known accounts, the story of the great flood in the days of Noah, when rising waters covered the land and changed the course of human history. One verse from Scripture captures the overwhelming power of floodwaters. All the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Book of Genesis 7:11. For those watching the river rise today, the memory of those ancient words can feel chillingly real. And the sky above grows darker. Rain continues falling without pause. And the river keeps rising. The floodwater pushes farther into streets and neighborhoods. Boats replace cars. Rescue teams move through the flooded areas, searching for people who could not escape in time. Even after the rain begins to weaken, the swollen river continues to surge forward, carrying the force of the storm through everything in its path. Only after many long hours does the water finally begin to slow. But when the flood eventually recedes, it leaves behind a changed landscape, broken homes, scattered debris, and the heavy silence of a disaster that arrived faster than anyone expected. Yet storms rarely come alone. Because sometimes, before or even during the most violent weather, another strange phenomenon begins to appear in the sky, something that many witnesses struggle to explain. After weeks of strange disturbances along the Jordan River, things finally seemed to calm down. The violent winds had faded, the unusual bubbling of the water had stopped, and the skies above the valley slowly returned to their normal pale blue. Life near the river began to feel ordinary again. Fishermen returned to the banks. Travelers passed along the nearby paths. Pilgrims once again approached the water quietly, believing the unsettling events had finally ended. For a while, everything felt peaceful. The river flowed gently through the land, just as it had for centuries. The current moved calmly between its banks, reflecting the sunlight and the surrounding hills. People spoke about how the strange events had likely passed, and many believed the Jordan had returned to its familiar rhythm. But that sense of peace would not last. One morning, as the sun began rising over the valley, several locals walking along the river noticed something unusual. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light reflecting across the surface of the water. But as they stepped closer to the riverbank, the sight became impossible to ignore. The river was no longer one color. Down the center of the current ran a sharp dividing line. On one side of the river, the water appeared deep red, spreading through the current like flowing blood. On the other side, the river remained its usual bluish-green color, clear and calm as it moved past the shore. The contrast was shocking. The two colors touched each other, yet they did not blend. The red water continued moving forward, while the blue-green current flowed beside it, separated by a boundary that stretched along the river's surface. Word spread quickly among nearby villages. Within hours, people gathered along the banks of the Jordan River, staring at the strange sight unfolding before them. Some whispered in disbelief. Others raised their phones to capture the moment. The river looked divided into two different worlds flowing through the same channel. Witnesses pointed toward the water, trying to understand what they were seeing. Rivers are supposed to mix. When different currents meet, their colors normally swirl together until they become one. But here, the two waters refused to blend. The red current remained on one side. The green-blue water stayed on the other. Even as the river moved forward, the boundary between them remained strangely clear. Some people stepped back from the shoreline, unsettled by the sight. Others leaned closer, watching carefully to see if the colors would eventually merge. But they did not. The separation continued as the river flowed downstream. One man who had lived near the river for decades spoke quietly as he watched the divided water. "I have seen this river my whole life," he said, "but I have never seen it like this. It looks as if the river has been split into two different worlds." For many observers, the moment felt deeply symbolic. The Jordan River has always held powerful meaning for believers. It is mentioned many times in the Bible, often as a place where extraordinary events took place. Because of that history, the strange sight of red and blue water flowing side by side caused many to remember an ancient verse that speaks about the power of God over the waters of the earth. He turned the sea into dry land. They passed through the waters on foot. Book of Psalms 66:6. As people continued standing along the riverbank, watching the divided currents move quietly past them, the same question began to spread among the crowd. Why would the river suddenly carry two colors? Why would the red water refuse to mix with the blue current beside it? No one there could give a clear answer. They could only stand and watch as the mysterious river continued flowing forward, two colors moving side by side beneath the morning light. As people continued gathering along the banks of the Jordan River, their attention slowly shifted toward the side of the river where the water had turned deep red. At first, most of them were focused only on the strange color of the current. The red water moved steadily downstream, separated from the calm blue-green side by a sharp line that still refused to disappear. But then someone standing near the edge of the river pointed toward the surface. Something was moving inside the red current. Small shapes began appearing just beneath the water, gliding slowly with the flow of the river. As more people leaned forward to look closer, the shapes became clearer. They were fish, but not the kind people usually saw in the Jordan River. Swimming through the red water was a large group of fish with a soft pink color, their bodies glowing faintly beneath the strange crimson current. Dozens of them moved together in a tight formation, their fins flashing as they turned in the light. Then the number grew. More fish appeared from deeper in the river, joining the group until an entire school was moving through the red current. They did not scatter in different directions the way fish normally do when disturbed. Instead, they stayed together. The pink fish swam in a slow, steady formation, moving as if they were following a path that only they could see. People along the riverbank fell silent. Some crouched down to get a closer look, while others stepped back, uneasy about what they were witnessing. The school of fish continued moving forward through the red water, their bodies weaving through the current in synchronized motion. At times, the fish turned together, creating ripples that spread across the surface of the river. One witness later described the moment in a quiet voice. "The water was red, and inside it we saw the fish moving together. They weren't swimming randomly. It looked like they were guiding the flow of the river, or leading something we could not see." The sight was both beautiful and unsettling. The pink fish moved calmly, almost gracefully, but the strange color of the water around them made the scene feel mysterious. Their bodies flashed beneath the crimson current, forming patterns that drifted slowly downstream. Some observers began whispering among themselves. Why were the fish gathered in such large numbers? Why were they swimming only on the red side of the river? And why did their movement look so deliberate, as if they were guiding the current rather than simply drifting with it? For many who witnessed the moment, the image stayed in their minds long after the fish had disappeared farther down the river. A divided river, red water flowing beside clear water, and within the crimson current, a silent school of pink fish moving together as if they were leading the way towards something unseen beneath the surface. Throughout history, rivers have never been just flowing water. They have been places where extraordinary moments unfold, where nature seems to behave in ways that make people stop and look closer. The Jordan River is one of those places. According to the Bible, this river has already witnessed events that many believers consider miraculous. Either there was a time when the Jordan River stopped flowing, allowing the people of Israel to cross into the Promised Land. The waters rose and stood still while thousands walked across the dry riverbed. Another moment occurred when the prophet Elijah struck the river with his cloak, and the water divided so that he and his companion could pass through. But the strange moments connected to rivers do not end there. In different places and at different times, people have reported seeing rivers split into two colors, currents flowing side by side without mixing. Some rivers have suddenly erupted with bubbling water rising from below the surface. In other moments, violent floods have turned peaceful waterways into unstoppable forces that sweep through cities and villages. And sometimes, after the skies darken and the winds begin to spin, terrifying tornadoes appear, twisting columns of air capable of tearing apart everything in their path. Each of these events, when viewed on its own, might have an explanation. Some may be caused by unusual weather patterns. Others may result from geological changes beneath the earth. Some might simply be rare natural phenomena that occur only once in many years. Yet, when people step back and look at the bigger picture, the pattern can feel unsettling. Rivers dividing, waters changing color, currents erupting from below, floods rising without warning, storms spinning across the sky. Moments like these remind us how powerful and unpredictable the natural world can be. For some observers, these events are simply rare occurrences shaped by the forces of nature. For others, they may carry a deeper meaning, reminders that the world around us is guided by forces far beyond human understanding. Which leads to a question that continues to echo whenever strange things happen in the waters of the earth. Are these simply rare natural events? Or reminders that the forces shaping our world are far greater than we understand? If you found this story fascinating, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And tell us what you think in the comments below. Do you believe these events are natural, or signs meant for us to notice? Type Amen in the comments if you believe peace will return to the earth.
Poland is set to declare a state of natural disaster as extreme flooding extends across parts of central.
The Jordan River has flowed for thousands of years, through kingdoms, prophets, and countless generations. But now, the water is slowly pulling back. As the river retreats, things long hidden are beginning to appear. Strange shapes in the riverbed, ancient markings carved into stone, objects that seem to belong to a time no one clearly remembers. For centuries, this river has been tied to faith, prophecy, and mystery. So the question grows louder. When the Jordan River pulls away its waters, what exactly is it revealing? If this moment feels more than ordinary, stay with us. And before we go further, like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe as we uncover what may be emerging from this ancient river. For centuries, the waters of the Jordan River have flowed quietly through the land, carrying stories of faith, prophecy, and history. Pilgrims have come to its banks for generations, remembering the moment when Jesus Christ was baptized here by John the Baptist. To many believers, this river is more than water. It is a place where heaven and earth once seemed to meet. But recently, something deeply unusual has begun to unfold along parts of the river. Witnesses first noticed strange activity in the water itself. In one section, the river surface began to ripple violently. Steam rose slowly into the air, as if the water below had suddenly become intensely hot. From a distance, it looked almost as though the river was boiling. Some people standing along the banks said they could feel warm air drifting upward from the surface. "I've lived near this river for more than 40 years, one local man said quietly, while watching the mist rise. I've never seen the water behave like this. It's as if the river itself is breathing heat." Yet, only a short distance away, the opposite scene appeared. Along another stretch of the same river, thin layers of ice began forming along the edges of rocks and plants. The air temperature was cool but far from freezing. Still, patches of frost clung to parts of the riverbank, while the water there moved slowly and quietly beneath them. A woman visiting the site reportedly whispered to those around her, "How can one part of the river feel like fire, while another part feels like winter? This place has always been sacred, but this feels different." Scientists soon arrived with instruments to measure what was happening. Their temperature sensors revealed something equally strange. In certain areas, the water temperature rose dramatically, and far higher than expected for a flowing river. But just a few meters away, readings dropped sharply, cold enough for ice to begin forming along the edges. For researchers, the contrast was difficult to explain. Rivers normally mix their water constantly, keeping temperatures relatively stable. But here, the measurements suggested two extreme conditions existing almost side by side. Some experts proposed that underground geothermal activity might be heating pockets of water beneath the riverbed. Others suggested unusual mineral reactions or hidden springs could be creating localized temperature shifts. Yet none of the early theories fully explained why the changes were happening so suddenly. Meanwhile, many people standing along the river could not help thinking about words written thousands of years ago in the Bible. In Isaiah 43:16 it says, "Thus says the Lord, who makes a way in the sea and a path through the mighty waters." And in Joshua 3:17, the Jordan River itself once stopped flowing as the Israelites crossed on dry ground. For believers, those passages are reminders that this river has witnessed events that once seemed impossible. Now, as steam rises from one section, while ice quietly forms in another, people watching the river are beginning to ask a question that echoes through the crowd. If the waters of the Jordan are behaving in ways rarely seen before, what else beneath this ancient river might be beginning to awaken? Not long after the strange temperature shifts appeared along the waters of the Jordan River, another unusual scene began to unfold. People standing along the banks started noticing movement beneath the surface, and fish and other small river creatures slowly drifted upward, floating quietly near the top of the water. For many locals, the sight was unsettling. The river had always been full of life, with fish moving constantly through the currents. But now the surface looked strangely still, interrupted only by the occasional ripple as more creatures rose from below. One fisherman who had worked these waters for decades reportedly shook his head as he looked across the river. "I've known this river my whole life," he said softly. "When the water changes like this, the life inside it changes too. But I've never seen it happen so quickly." Some residents believed the extreme temperature shifts, areas of unusual heat and sudden cold, may have disturbed the delicate balance of the river. When water conditions change rapidly, even strong aquatic species can struggle to adjust. Scientists who later examined the situation suggested that sudden thermal differences could affect oxygen levels in the water, forcing fish toward the surface. Yet what troubled many observers was not just what was happening in the water, but what began happening next. In the days that followed, the river itself appeared to change. People who returned to the same observation points along the Jordan River began noticing that the waterline was no longer where it had been before. At first, the change was subtle. Rocks that had once sat just beneath the surface were now visible above the water. Then more of the riverbed began to appear. Large patches of stone slowly emerged along the banks, areas that local residents said they had never seen exposed before. Children walking along the shoreline pointed to dark shapes beneath the shallow water, flat stone slabs, uneven ridges, and layers of earth that had likely been hidden beneath the river for decades, perhaps longer. Within a surprisingly short period of time, the drop in water level became difficult to ignore. Drone images taken by visitors and journalists revealed long stretches of the river, where the water appeared thinner and narrower than usual. What had once been a wide-moving channel now showed expanding bars of rock and sediment cutting through the flow. To many who had grown up near the river, the transformation felt sudden. A local shop owner who lived near the riverbank described the change with visible concern. "Every year the river rises and falls a little," he explained. "That's normal. But this is different. The water seems to be stepping backward." Scientists studying the phenomenon quickly began offering possible explanations. Some researchers pointed to long-term drought conditions affecting parts of the region. Others mentioned the growing impact of climate shifts, which can reduce rainfall and increase evaporation over time. Upstream water usage, agricultural diversion, and dam systems were also suggested as factors that could gradually lower river levels. From a scientific perspective, each of these explanations made sense. Rivers around the world have experienced similar changes when environmental pressures combine. Yet along the banks of the Jordan River, the conversation was not limited to environmental science. For many people, the timing of the changes felt unusual. At first, the strange temperature contrasts, sections of the river steaming while others grew unexpectedly cold. Then the sudden disturbance among fish and aquatic life. And now, the water itself quietly pulling away from the land it had covered for so long. Some residents began gathering along the newly exposed areas, carefully stepping across rocks that had not seen open air for years. As more of the riverbed appeared, curiosity grew. What else might be hidden beneath the waters of a river that has flowed through thousands of years of human history? For believers familiar with Scripture, the question carried an even deeper weight. The Jordan River has appeared many times in the Bible, often during moments when events seem to shift in unexpected ways. In Joshua 3:15-16, the waters of the Jordan once stopped flowing entirely, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground. That ancient story describes a moment when the river itself seemed to respond to something greater. Now, standing on the same banks thousands of years later, people watch as the water level continues to fall, slowly revealing stones, ridges, and dark shapes beneath the surface that few living today have ever seen. Scientists continue to study rainfall patterns, geological activity, and water management systems, searching for answers that fit the evidence. But among the growing crowd of visitors who now come to see the changing river with their own eyes, one quiet question continues to circulate. If the Jordan River is beginning to uncover what it has hidden for generations, what might still be waiting beneath the water that remains? And if this story has captured your curiosity, take a moment to like the video and keep watching. Because what may appear next along this ancient river is something few people would ever expect. As the waters of the Jordan River continued to retreat, the landscape beneath the river slowly began to reveal itself. What had once been hidden under flowing water for generations was now exposed to sunlight for the first time in decades, perhaps even centuries. At first, the discoveries seemed ordinary. Smooth stones, layers of sediment, and long-buried tree branches appeared along the drying edges of the riverbed. But as the waterline pulled back further, people began noticing shapes that did not look natural.